I'm sitting on the edge of a motel bed just outside Austin, in a place that smells like bleach trying to cover something older. Something sour that never quite left the curtains. Jerry, Sean's father, dropped me off without pressing for details. His goodbye just a tired take care. Like he already knew more than he should but chose not to say it. Yesterday, in the low light of Mike's workshop, I kissed him, not out of passion. Not even entirely out of want. But because something in me broke open when he asked if I ever felt heard. I don't know if Sean knows, but something tells me he does, or at least suspects more than he lets on. This morning, when I left, he didn't stop me. Didn't ask where I was going, didn't even look at me for more than a second. He just handed it off to his dad like I was a package being returned. Now the silence in this room feels loaded, not peaceful but expectant. Like something is waiting to happen. Or maybe already has and I just haven't caught up to it yet. Sean told me his dad would drive me to meet some suppliers in Hayes County. Said it like it was a regular errand, nothing to think twice about. But when we pulled up to that weather-worn trailer with the gravel crunching under the tires, I knew he'd lied by omission because that wasn't any kind of meeting, it was Mike's workshop. The same place I hadn't been since everything between us got messy months ago. Sean never mentioned Mike would be there, never even hinted at it, which felt deliberate, like he wanted something to happen without having to say it out loud. Inside, the air smelled like sawdust and metal and memories I hadn't dealt with. And Mike looked surprised but not shocked. Like maybe he'd been warned or maybe he just expected things to keep circling back like this. I stood there pretending to look around, pretending this was normal, but my hands were clenched in my pockets. And I could feel my chest tighten with something that wasn't exactly fear but wasn't comfort either. We sat on a workbench eating burgers from a local diner. The kind of meal that should have felt easy. But every bite stuck in my throat like a question I didn't want to ask. And then Mike said it told me that last year, Sean had asked him to keep an eye on me, to help around the house but really to report back, which he did for a while until it started to feel wrong. He looked at me like he wanted me to understand something deeper, said Sean didn't trust anyone. Not even himself, and there was something in his voice tired. Like this had worn him down too. Outside, the wind rattled the thin trailer walls and inside, everything went quiet except for the clink of plastic forks against takeout boxes. I didn't ask why Mike told me then or what he expected me to do with it, but the air between us shifted, like maybe this wasn't just about the past anymore. I didn't say much. I didn't know what part of me he was speaking to. I told Sean I'd forgotten my laptop. Said I needed to swing by the workshop and he didn't question it, just nodded without looking up from whatever was on his phone, which felt like permission wrapped in indifference. When I walked into the workshop, Mike was there alone, wiping down tools. Music low in the background like he'd expected company but wasn't sure who. I found the laptop easily, but I didn't leave. He asked, quietly, if I'd ever felt like my voice actually mattered, and something about the way he said it, without drama or demand, made it hard to breathe for a second. I didn't answer, we just stood there in a silence that wasn't empty. And then I kissed him, not out of planning or even regret, just something raw and sudden and real. He pulled back, not angry, not cold, just steady, said I didn't have to decide anything now. But I knew, standing there with his breath still on my lips and my heart making too much noise, that I already had, and nothing would be simple again that evening. Sean suggested dinner at the local cafe, the one with the mismatched chairs and too bright lighting that always made everything feel exposed. And I agreed because pretending nothing had changed felt easier than starting a conversation I wasn't ready to finish. When we got there, Merrill was already at the table, his business partner with the polished smile and perfectly timed laughter. And he sat beside her like that's where he belonged, laughing at her jokes, touching her arm in ways that didn't mean nothing. I picked at my food, smiled when expected, but the air around me felt thick. Like everyone at that table knew something I hadn't said out loud yet. Sean never asked how the day went, never mentioned Mike, but the pauses in his sentences felt like traps, like he was waiting for me to say it first. I didn't, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure who I'd be once the words were out. And maybe neither of us really wanted to meet that version of me yet. I ran into Mike in the parking lot outside the grocery store. Or maybe he was waiting, I couldn't tell, and I didn't ask. He leaned against my car like he belonged there. Like this wasn't the middle of something falling apart. We sat inside, windows fogging slightly, and he told me things I didn't know I needed to hear. Said Sean had once tried to wreck his name in town. Spread lies that stuck just long enough to cost him work and trust. He wasn't angry, not anymore, just tired. Like someone who'd been surviving a storm too long to remember when it started. Then he said we could go, leave it all, start fresh somewhere with fewer ghosts, and for a second I believed it. Felt the weight in my chest shift, but then fear hit sharp, familiar and hard to ignore. I told him no, not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't trust the part of me that did. He didn't fight me, just nodded like he'd expected it. And we sat in silence until it felt safe to say goodbye without making promises we couldn't keep. Meryl texted the next morning, asked if I wanted to grab coffee. And I said yes without thinking. Maybe because I needed a version of the truth that wasn't tangled in my own voice. We sat outside a bakery where the traffic made it easier to avoid eye contact. But she didn't waste time, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not the first he's frozen out." Like this was something routine, like Sean's silence was a language she'd already learned to translate. Then she leaned in, voice low but calm, and added, "And if you think he didn't know about you and Mike, you're wrong, he always knew." There was no anger in her words, no accusation. Just a strange kind of clarity that hit harder than anything else had. She wasn't warning me, she was letting me see the game I'd stumbled into. One where feelings were currency and silence was a weapon, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just caught between two brothers, I was standing in the middle of a story that had started long before I arrived. Sean asked to meet at his office. And when I walked in, everything was already laid out, divorce papers stacked neatly on the desk. A pen beside them like this had been rehearsed. He didn't look angry, didn't raise his voice or ask questions, he just said, almost quietly, "You knew you didn't want this before we even got married, I just waited for you to figure it out." There was no judgment in his tone, just a kind of resignation that felt heavier than yelling ever could. I sat down across from him, trying to think of something that would make this feel less clinical, but nothing came. He watched me like someone watching a door close they'd been holding open too long. I didn't cry, didn't fight it, because he was right and we both knew it. The silence between us wasn't cruel anymore, just final. When I signed my name, my hand didn't shake. I walked out carrying nothing, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if that was loss or relief. I drove to Julie's place without calling first. Pulled into her driveway like I used to back when we were still part of each other's everyday lives, not just occasional texts and birthday likes. She opened the door in an old hoodie, didn't ask questions, just hugged me like she'd been waiting. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years, and still, she knew, over tea and chipped mugs. I told her what happened, some of it, not all, and she listened the way only someone who remembers the version of you before the damage can. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You haven't been yourself since you married him. We all saw it, you were just the last to admit it." Her words didn't hurt, they landed like facts I already knew but needed to hear out loud. I wasn't innocent, but I wasn't a victim either. I'd made choices, stayed silent. Followed a version of love that felt more like obligation, and in Julie's living room, with nothing dramatic hanging in the air, I finally let that truth settle. Now I'm back in the same motel, in the same room, but everything feels different, not better, not worse, just stripped down to whatever's real. The house is gone, the ring's in a drawer I don't plan to open, and the silence I once feared is now the only thing that makes any sense. Mike's not calling. Sean's not texting, and for the first time in months, there's no one watching. No one waiting for my next move. I sit by the window, watching cars pass like they're part of a world I'm not quite in anymore. There's no plan, no job lined up, no speech to rehearse. Just this moment and the strange calm that comes with not needing to perform. I thought making a choice would bring clarity, but all it brought was space, and maybe that's enough for now. I'm not chasing answers, not writing a fresh start. I'm just here, breathing through the mess I made and not pretending it means more than it does. There's no lesson, just me, still here,